The winter wind sliced through the avenues of the city like a blade. Between the towering glass buildings that glittered with warmth and wealth, a lone figure huddled in the shadows of a closed storefront. His coat was threadbare, his gloves mismatched, and his beard tangled from nights spent on frozen pavement. Yet in his arms, wrapped carefully in a woolen scarf, rested a mutt with one cloudy eye. The dog's head rose each time a passerby's heels clattered past, as though still expecting kindness from the world. The man, whose name was Daniel, whispered to his companion, "Don't worry, Max. We'll find a way. We always do." His voice, cracked and rough, carried more reassurance for the dog than for himself. The city had forgotten him, but he refused to forget tenderness. That morning, he had stood in line at the soup kitchen, but supplies ran out before his turn. Hunger gnawed at him like a relentless rat, yet Daniel gave the last half of his bread crust to Max. "You first, buddy. Always you first." As dawn stretched into daylight, the street outside the glass headquarters of Harrington Global filled with movement. A chauffeur opened the door of a sleek black car. Polished shoes hit the pavement. Out stepped Richard Harrington, CEO, Billionaire, a man whose watch cost more than everything Daniel had owned in his entire life. Richard moved with a confidence that declared the world belonged to him. Daniel, with trembling hope, rose from his spot. He held Max close, approached cautiously, and spoke in a respectful tone. "Sir, please, just a little help. I don't need much, just enough to get food for my dog and me." For a brief second, Richard's sharp blue eyes met Daniel's. The city's noise hushed in that moment. A homeless man, desperate yet dignified, face to face with a man who wielded power like a crown. Richard's lip curled almost imperceptibly. "Get a job. Don't beg outside my company." He stepped forward, brushing past as though Daniel were nothing but an inconvenience on the sidewalk. His voice, cold as steel, carried the weight of dismissal. "People like you made your choices. Don't make them mine." Daniel froze. The sting of humiliation cut deeper than hunger. He lowered his gaze, hugging Max tighter, whispering, "It's okay, boy. Not today, maybe tomorrow." But even as Richard's footsteps clicked away, fate was watching. What neither man knew was that a single act of cruelty, one refusal in the freezing wind, would ripple outward, circling back in ways Richard Harrington could never imagine. Karma had begun its quiet work, and the city was about to witness just how swiftly fortunes can turn. The day stretched long and merciless. Daniel shuffled back to his usual corner, the one with the cracked lamppost and the broken grate that leaked warm air from the subway below. Max curled close to him, grateful for the thin shield against the cold. Daniel leaned against the wall, his ribs aching with each breath. Hunger pressed harder than ever, but he forced his eyes closed and thought of better times. There had been a time when he was not invisible. Years ago, Daniel wore pressed shirts and sat at a desk. He was a systems engineer, meticulous and skilled. But layoffs came during a merger, and the illness that stole his wife soon devoured his savings. Bills piled, creditors knocked, and the apartment slipped from his grasp. When the eviction notice landed, Daniel packed his life into 2 garbage bags and walked out. Only Max, then a stray pup he found trembling under a bridge, stayed with him. Together they fought for every day. That night, Daniel dreamt of warm kitchens and his wife's voice humming old lullabies. He woke with tears crusted in his lashes. The next morning, as Daniel scavenged near a dumpster, he spotted something odd. A leather briefcase, abandoned, lying against the alley wall. He opened it carefully. Inside were documents stamped with the Harrington Global crest, and a sleek laptop still glowing faintly. Daniel hesitated. His conscience wrestled with the hunger in his belly. But finally, he zipped the case and said, "We're not thieves, Max. We return it." The receptionist at Harrington Global barely looked at him when he entered. Her eyes dropped to his torn coat, then to the briefcase in his hand. "Security!" she called, her voice sharp. 2 guards approached, suspicion already written on their faces. Daniel's words stumbled. "Please, I found this. It belongs to someone here. One guard snatched the case, rifling through it. They found Richard Harrington's name embossed inside. The guard muttered, "This is the CO's. How did you get it?" Daniel explained, each sentence stripped bare of pride but full of truth. He described the alley, the way the case was lying unattended. But suspicion clung to him like grime. Finally, the guards relented and carried the briefcase upstairs. Daniel was pushed back onto the street with nothing, not even a word of thanks. Yet upstairs, when Richard Harrington opened the case, a flicker of unease passed over him. He had lost it during a phone call the night before, distracted as he stepped into his car. Whoever returned it could have stolen sensitive data worth millions. Instead, everything remained intact. "Strange," Richard muttered, but the thought soon dissolved in the flood of his daily deals and calls. Meanwhile, Daniel sat outside, empty-handed but calm. He stroked Max's ears. "We did the right thing, didn't we?" His voice was soft, resolute. "That's all that matters." 2 days later, fate pressed harder. Daniel, walking past the subway entrance, heard a shriek. A woman had stumbled on the stairs, her toddler slipping from her grasp. Without a thought, Daniel lunged forward. His arms scooped the child just before a train thundered past. The mother screamed, then collapsed into sobs of relief, clutching her son. Daniel smiled faintly, brushing dust from the boy's coat. "He's safe now," he whispered, handing him back. Witnesses gathered, murmuring in awe. Someone snapped a picture. Daniel's weathered face, his ragged coat, the rescued child in his arms. By evening, the image had spread online. "Homeless hero saves toddler," the headlines blazed. But in the boardroom of Harrington Global, Richard scrolled past the photo without recognition. He had no idea the man in rags, the man he dismissed on the street, was the same hero now celebrated in whispers. The days rolled forward. Daniel's body weakened, his stomach empty, but his spirit held fast. Each small act of kindness, sharing his blanket with another homeless man, guiding an elderly blind woman across the street, even offering his last coin to buy bread for a stray cat, stitched invisible threads of dignity around him. He was poor but not broken. And all the while, Richard Harrington's empire began to wobble. A scandal brewed quietly in the background. Whispers of insider trading, partners turning hostile, deals unraveling. At first, he dismissed it as noise. But soon the noise became thunder. The city was preparing to watch two lives collide once more. One man climbing toward the light despite the cold, and another tumbling despite his wealth. Richard Harrington had built his empire on speed and certainty. He thrived on numbers, deals, and decisive gestures. But in recent weeks, the certainty had begun to fracture. One morning, as he entered the sleek marble lobby of Harrington Global, his phone buzzed with a call from his attorney. "Richard," the voice said, tense and clipped. "We've got a problem. The SEC is investigating irregular trades linked to your partners. If they find evidence, they'll drag you into it." Richard clenched his jaw. "Handle it. That's what I pay you for." But no amount of money could stop the dominoes already falling. Contracts he had depended on dissolved overnight. Longtime investors backed away, their trust shaken by rumors. Even the employees whispered in elevators, wondering if the empire would hold. At home, silence thickened. His penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and endless skyline view, felt like a glass cage. His wife, Margaret, had left months ago, tired of his absence and his arrogance. His son, Andrew, texted less and less, resentful of the father who measured love in allowances instead of time. For the first time in years, Richard sat alone at the dinner table, staring at a plate gone cold. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel faced struggles of a different kind. His photo as the homeless hero had drawn sympathy for a week, but viral fame faded quickly. Reporters stopped coming, donations dried up, and the streets reclaimed him. Hunger clawed at his insides. Max grew thin, his ribs showing, yet Daniel still broke scraps in half to share with him. One evening, Daniel spotted a man collapsed outside a liquor store. Without hesitation, he rushed forward, checking the man's breathing. The crowd lingered, muttering but doing nothing. Daniel tilted the man's head back, pressed his hands firmly, and began chest compressions. He counted under his breath, his own breath steaming in the cold night. "Stay with me. Don't leave yet." After minutes that stretched like hours, the man gasped and coughed. The crowd erupted into applause. Paramedics arrived, bewildered to find that a homeless man had kept a stranger alive until they came. Daniel slipped away quietly, Max at his heels, before anyone could ask his name. Yet fate would not let him stay invisible much longer. Because on the very next morning, Richard Harrington collapsed in his own boardroom. Stress, lack of sleep, and the relentless spiral of scandal crashed into his chest. Executives panicked as he fell to the floor, clutching his heart. Sirens wailed. An ambulance raced him to St. Luke's Hospital. There, in the crowded ER, Richard lay pale and trembling, stripped of his power, reduced to just another body on a gurney. And in the waiting area, with Max curled at his feet, sat Daniel. He had come seeking warmth, knowing hospitals often left their doors open to those with nowhere else to go. Their eyes met. Recognition flared on both sides. Richard's face hardened with shame. Shame not of his fall, but of the memory. The freezing morning when he brushed Daniel aside like trash. And now, here he was, weaker than ever, depending on strangers' mercy. Daniel lowered his gaze, then softly whispered to Max, "Funny how life turns the tables. The days ahead would bind them together in ways neither man could have foreseen." Richard's condition worsened over the next 2 days. The heart scare was only the beginning. Tests revealed blocked arteries. Years of stress carved into his body like stone. Doctors recommended surgery, but it came with risks. Richard, once so invincible, now lay tethered to machines, his empire spiraling out of his grasp. The board moved swiftly in his absence. Deals slipped away, stock values plummeted, and whispers spread like wildfire. Some directors were already plotting a coup. Richard's name, once synonymous with triumph, now carried the weight of scandal and weakness. In the same hospital, Daniel slept curled against the wall of the waiting room, Max keeping watch beside him. He wasn't there for Richard. He had come to visit a boy he'd once saved, the toddler from the subway stairs. The mother had found him through a social worker, and when she learned he had nowhere to stay, she asked him to come by. "You're a hero," she told him softly. "The least I can do is offer you a warm meal while my son thanks you properly." Daniel had agreed, not for the praise, but for the chance to see a child alive and laughing. Proof that his struggles hadn't been meaningless. But fate had other plans. Late one night, chaos erupted in the hospital. A fire alarm blared, smoke curling from a faulty generator in the basement. Patients were rushed out, hallways crammed with panic. Nurses pushed gurneys, children cried, alarms screamed. Through the haze, Daniel heard shouting, "Room 407, we need help. The patient can't move on his own." Room 407. Richard Harrington. Daniel froze. The same man who had turned him away, humiliated him in the freezing street. Karma had set the stage. This was the moment where choices revealed souls. Max barked, tugging at Daniel's sleeve, urging him forward. Daniel rushed into the smoke-filled corridor. Inside room 407, Richard was struggling weakly against his wires and 4 lines, his face ghostly pale. The nurse had gone to fetch more help, leaving him momentarily stranded. Flames licked closer from the electrical sparks in the hall. Richard's eyes widened when he saw who burst through the door. "You!" he croaked, disbelief and shame mixing in his trembling voice. Daniel's chest heaved. Every bitter memory pressed against him. Hunger, humiliation. The cold words spat outside the skyscraper. He could walk away now. No one would blame him. It would be karma's clean justice. But Daniel stepped forward. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I don't leave people behind." He ripped the 4 from its stand, hoisted Richard's frail body onto his back with surprising strength, and staggered into the smoke. Max darted ahead, barking, guiding them toward the exit. The hallway blurred with fire and confusion. Nurses cried out, pointing, rushing to help. Daniel stumbled, choking on smoke, his arms burning from the weight. Richard clung to him weakly, gasping. "Why?" Richard whispered, coughing. "After everything, why save me?" Daniel's voice cracked as he pushed through the smoke. "Because no one's worth leaving to die. Not even you." The exit loomed ahead, glowing red through the haze. With one final heave, Daniel carried Richard out into the freezing night air. Paramedics swarmed, pulling Richard onto a gurney, strapping oxygen over his mouth. Nurses reached for Daniel too, but he waved them off, collapsing to his knees, Max pressing against his side. The crowd outside murmured in awe. Some had their phones raised, recording the homeless man who carried the billionaire through fire. The same man once dismissed as nothing. And Richard, staring up at the smoky sky, felt tears sting his eyes. Not from the smoke, but from the realization that the man he had scorned had become his savior. The fire was contained within hours, but the image of Daniel carrying Richard out of the smoke spread like wildfire across the city. News outlets replayed it endlessly. A homeless man risking his life to save a billionaire. Social media buzzed with outrage, awe, and reflection. At the hospital, Richard recovered slowly, his body weakened but his spirit shaken awake. He replayed that night again and again. The moment he saw Daniel through the smoke, the rough voice that said, "I don't leave people behind," the arms that bore him out when his own legs had failed. He remembered the cold morning outside his building, the words he had spat like venom. "People like you made your choices." Now he saw the truth. The man he had dismissed had chosen compassion, again and again, even when the world had given him nothing in return. Richard asked to see him. When Daniel entered the room, still in his ragged coat, Max at his side, silence fell. Richard, pale but steady, reached for his hand. His voice cracked with a humility no one at Harrington Global had ever heard before. "I was wrong about you. Wrong about everything. You didn't just save my life. You showed me what it means to be human." Daniel shifted uneasily, unused to praise. "I only did what anyone should do," he murmured. "No," Richard replied, his grip tightening. "Not anyone. I couldn't even spare $1 for you. And you gave me back everything." Tears stung Richard's eyes as he turned toward Max. "And you shared your food with him, didn't you? When you had nothing." His throat caught. "I can't undo what I said, but I can do better. If you'll let me." Daniel hesitated, then nodded faintly. Forgiveness was not easy, but his heart had never learned to hate. In the weeks that followed, Richard made good on his vow. He arranged housing for Daniel and Max, a modest but warm apartment with food stocked in the cupboards. More than that, he offered Daniel a job, not charity but recognition. Daniel's skills as an engineer, long buried under years of hardship, found light again. At his first day in the new office, co-workers whispered, curious about the man with weathered hands and kind eyes. Richard introduced him not as someone I'm helping, but as the man who saved my life and who deserves all of our respect. Daniel flushed with quiet dignity, Max at his side, tail wagging like a banner of triumph. The city, too, began to change. People who had once stepped over Daniel now greeted him. Neighbors left meals at his door. Strangers offered handshakes. The story had planted seeds of compassion in hearts that had grown cold. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the skyline gold, Richard visited Daniel's new apartment. They sat on the balcony with coffee, Max snoozing between them. The city hummed beneath their feet. Richard spoke softly. "You know, Daniel, I used to think success was about power, money, control. But lying in that hospital with fire closing in, none of it mattered. What mattered was you. A man with nothing, who gave me everything. Karma didn't just catch me. Taught me. Through you." Daniel gazed out at the city lights, his eyes reflecting something brighter. "We're all just people, Richard. Some fall harder than others. But no one deserves to be forgotten." For a long time, they sat in silence, the air between them filled with understanding. Two men from opposite worlds, bound now not by wealth or poverty, but by the fragile, unshakable truth of shared humanity. The story did not end with riches or power, but with something far rarer: redemption, respect, and the reminder that kindness, once given, always returns. And somewhere in the quiet, Max gave a contented sigh, as if he too knew that, at last, they were home. Final message: the world often measures worth in money and status, but life itself measures us by our choices. A single act of kindness can echo louder than wealth, and even the coldest heart can be changed when it faces the truth of compassion.